Hello and welcome to this video. I'm creating this in response to a video I saw. Drak Games Time put out a video called Designing a Job for Final Fantasy XIV Fan Theorycraft Corsair Episode 1. And normally I would take to the comment section and talk about it myself, but I feel like I have a little bit more to say that might get lost in the comment section or through text, so to speak. And I just want to respond to that, get some of my own responses to that out there. This is mostly unscripted, but I do have some notes I took while watching the video, because I watched the video twice. Once as the first initial watch for it and thought it was very interesting, and then I watched it a second time and took some notes actually by this time. I will say that for the sake of keeping it civil, I suppose, I will say that I'm not arguing, in a way. I'm not arguing, I'm just putting my concerns with the game design idea of it. Or concerns, what I like about it, what I dislike about it, or what goes through my mind when I see this kind of stuff, or when I get the ideas for this kind of stuff. I have gone to college for game design, so I would like to imagine I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. And I will say that I have a tendency to be very crass in the way I talk. So if I say something that sounds mean, I don't mean it. I have a lot of respect for this creator, and enjoy what he's trying to do with this kind of stuff. So if it comes out negative, I don't mean it. It's just how I talk. I'm gonna repeat his disclaimer because I don't want any miscommunication on that front either. So I'm pretty much reading word for word his disclaimer, except I'm not going to say some other stuff that doesn't apply to me. So I'm going to say that I, Monstergirl-ologist, am in no way, shape, or form affiliated with or associated with Square Enix, Final Fantasy XIV, or the Final Fantasy XIV development team. This is a fan theory craft for fun, and the ideas suggested here are not indicative of the job to come in the future of the game. Anything that we discuss here that might be added to Final Fantasy XIV will be at the discretion of the Final Fantasy XIV team. And with that, let's get this started. So I've kind of got these notes here in order, at least the best of my ability, because I kind of wrote them on sticky notes and stuck them to the side of my nightstand over here, and I just kind of stuck them on there. But I do have I think I tried to put them in order as best I could, but I was running out of space, so there might be a little jumbled up here. Alright, so I think the first thing he starts off is obviously some of the basics, and as what damage they deal, dexterity or strength based or magic based. It's dexterity main, which makes sense because it's supposed to be a pirate essentially, and pirates, when they fight, are usually on the move, and guns, at least in Final Fantasy XIV, guns and ranged attacks are mostly dexterity based, because you're on the move. You usually have to maintain your eyesight with the enemy in a much more active fashion than swinging a weapon like that. They were using scouting gear. Scouting gear is going to be very unique, but I guess that's to mix up the idea that it's supposed to be a melee and a ranged job at the same time. So dexterity as your attack essentially, and the weapons was going to be a cutlass and a pistol, and that's where my first note comes in, and I can see either both ways, either being just the main arm and the icon is just the sword and the pistol in the same icon, and it fits the main weapon slot. I, however, thought it would be more interesting if the cutlass was the main arm and the pistol was the second arm, like how the paladin has his sword and shield. This will give another job the use of the second arm slot, or essentially, so it's not just used for paladins or non-combat jobs. While the mages, black mage and white mage, can use the secondary slot there, it's usually not. By the time you get in game, that's not a thought anymore. That secondary shield slot is only for like leveling purposes, essentially. So it's not realistic to think about white mage or black mage with a shield, unless they Manderville weapons or any weapons in the future actually come with a wand and shield, which I highly doubt, because I think by this point we're used to it. And Paladin being the only secondary shield slot, well, maybe that's the only one that makes sense. The only thing that's a problem with that is that obviously a pistol is not a shield, so that's not going to work unless they change the slot. And they start talking about how it's a physical range hybrid, pure hybrid. I don't know what that really supposed to mean, because what is a pure hybrid? That seems like an oxymoron. But if like the entire goal is to make it so they switch from melee to range, I think that's going to be very difficult to balance. I can see both sides as this being like a low DPS but high party utility type of job, or a selfish DPS, due to switching being already kind of complicated. And I think that when you go throughout this and you're going to play the game and actually use this, I think they're going to have much fewer job actions for like main attacks essentially than any other job, because they have two stances. They have their range stance and their melee stance, and that essentially fills out both, or essentially fills out the entirety of their job kit. Unlike, say, a Dark Knight will have a bunch of icons, this Corsair job will have half that, but they switch between those two halves. I feel like it's not going to be as creative as you might have to get, because they have to balance essentially two jobs into one. I also think this hybrid job will be a bit out of scope for what Final Fantasy usually does. And what scope is essentially like the basically trying to keep on track of what the design you're making is. You can't add too many things in your game because it'll take too much time. It'll take too much time to balance, and I think this will be out of scope for what Final Fantasy does, especially in the direction that Final Fantasy 14 is going, which is homogenizing everything. It leads to like the jobs having trouble with identifying from one another, but it's sort of the direction that I see Final Fantasy 14 going. And to be fair, people are only going to use the best version of their rotation of their job, what equipment they have. So if one of these stances ends up more powerful than the other, then it's going to be, I'm only going to use one version of it, which I see. I see melee stance being the main focus here. I see it being the job that you're possibly going to be in the most, because melee stance is probably going to have the highest potency. So it's going to be more worth it for you to be in melee stance than it is for you to be in range stance. And that's just how the game is balanced. Melee does more damage than any ranged job because they have to be in the face of the boss or whatever enemy they're fighting at all times. And so what you end up having here is, I'm going to only be in range stance when I need to be away from the boss. And based on what it was said later on in the video, is that those ranged attacks will be buffed, and by the time I get back into melee stance, those melee attacks will be buffed. However, once again, I just see either one or the other side being used. I think he goes on further to say that maybe he'll have this job will have a dancer-esque buff, like Dancer has their dance partner. He says that there will be, or there could possibly be, a first mate buff, and that's when you assign a buff to someone else and they're your first mate, and then they start filling out the gauge of or giving you meter for the empowered version of your melee arranged phase. And I think that's going to further hinder the ability to swap. I guess I don't see, like, if they're filling out the gauge that you need for you to be in melee, what reason do you have to swap? Because you're already getting that gauge for melee. You don't need to swap to in order to get that empowered move, unless of course you need to back away from the boss. And that, I think that's the main issue with this job balance, is that you have to figure out to make melee stance not be more powerful than a range stance. And then by that point, what's the point of being in melee? So you have to figure out that sweet spot, that very small sweet spot that makes it so you have to change. And I don't think there are going to be good reasons to change if this was like a real job that would come out. I have many questions for the unsheath or unholster skill that he talked about. I don't really know what it's going to be. He doesn't really explain it. I'm just like thinking it's a high potency OGCD. That's what it sounds like to me when I think about it. Because when I start watching this video, I like kind of start thinking. I'm already seeing like myself pressing the buttons, moving and clicking in a raid. I don't do Savage Raid like that, but I understand what goes into it. I'm like already thinking about it and already like seeing it in my mind's eye, I guess, because I'm one of those people who can like see pictures in the head, so I can already like visualize what it is I'm going to be trying to look at. I'm just wondering about with this note, I'm just asking a bunch of questions about unsheath and unholster. Is it a high potency OGCD? Is it just one? Is it one per switch or per stance? And do you need to switch? And what if both are full to incur switching? Like, what if both gauges get full to get a really high damage OGCD move when both gauges are full? Kind of like how red mage needs to balance out their meters, and when they do that, when one is bigger than the other, they get an enhanced like Ver Flare or Holy in order to get that next move out, and then they do their big finishers. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And I feel like that if the potency increase was big enough, that could encourage some switching, and I believe people would think that would be like some like technical fun with that, because now you have to balance your melee and range stance, but you have to like make it so that's not encroaching on red mage's identity. And then it goes into the treasure meter. Yeah, it goes into treasure meter, and I think that's a bit weird if you're gonna have both melee gauge and a range gauge, because having more than 2 meters is very rare. The only job that has more than 2 meters is Bard, and I guess that's in line with more the physical range DPS, which this job is planned to be, or visualized to be. I'm sorry, because this is not a real thing, it's a fan theory, but this is visualized to be a range DPS. So that being said, only Bard has more than 2. Yeah, only Bard has more than 2, which is the Coda, which I consider a meter because it is something that fills up when you do things. The songs and Pitch Perfect. And if you consider each song a separate meter, then Bard has 5 different meters, and they all switch out. They're not all active at the same time, unlike melee and range meters, which will all be active at the same time with Treasure Hunter. And I don't know how. I have a little curious about how Treasure Hunter will work in the grand scheme of things, because when he does the video, it sounds like you have to look for treasure, and I don't know how that's going to work. As I said before, I can see this job being a selfish high damage or party utility, and I think it's leaning more towards party utility, because I don't think this job can do that much damage. It's going to have all these gauge mechanics, and it's going to have a first mate buff. So I would think the treasure hunter ability would work better if it was party damage increase, because I don't see the shop doing, as an initial thought, I don't see this job doing that much damage. I imagine it being very very low damage, and I think looking for treasure while mid battle is going to be a problem, because you're already like savage. No, some extremes do this too, and some normal trials, but your positioning really matters in these in these fights. So trying to go around looking for a treasure to get that damage buff, or I don't know, a dot, I guess, is going to be problematic because you could end up stepping on someone's toes while you're doing the dance, and that will end up being a wipe. Obviously, it's something that maybe casters have to deal with because they can't cast while they're doing the dance, as you need to be still, at least for black mage, I guess, because red mage has instant cast and summoner only has Ifrit mode spells, which is probably the only casting has to do. Oh, I guess Garuda's enhanced thing. I don't know what it's called. So, and then I have to ask if treasure is visible to everyone, and then I think I would enjoy it if treasure was visible to everyone, because then they know what you're going after, so maybe they could adjust with you and position themselves for you getting the treasure, because if it's a party-wide buff, everyone gets the benefit for switching up to get that party-wide buff. What happens if there's two Corsairs? Because in Duty Finder, that's going to be a thing. Or like when you're randomly queuing it for a trial, that's going to be a thing. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So when there's two Corsairs, and maybe there's only Corsair's treasure is only visible to the Corsair, will they both be able to see the Corsair? And if it's visible to everyone, was there only one treasure for the Corsairs to both share, or is it one per? Can they both get it? Is there two treasures that will spawn randomly throughout the film? What if this treasure like spawns super close to a death wall? I mean, that's an easy fix, but yeah, it's something to think about. Can treasure spawn on the edge of a death wall, and you have to like put your tiptoe right on it just to get the buff? I mean, very risky, but nah, I don't know if that will be worth any reward. I'm just talking about some markings to get some damage increase, and I think that's indicative of Death's design or other DPS buff, and I think that would be good. I like that idea. I've always liked the idea of like having this buff to keep up. I think it's pretty fun. It gives you more active presses, I guess. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it makes you have to pay attention to your rotation a little bit more. Even though for me myself, it's kind of awkward because I have to think like 3 GCDs ahead before I press the button. And then for lastly, we have the LBs. And I was thinking, this is a fan design. It's probably not going to actually be in Final Fantasy XIV. Like I said, I think it's out of scope in the way that it is. So I was say, screw it. Just say there's 2 LBs. One for melee LB and one for a range stance LB. I like the idea of making it like a cast LB and all the worlds combined with it. But I don't think that'll happen because, once again, Final Fantasy XIV is a very homogenized piece of work now. And that's all the notes I have right there. And like I said, this video is here to like better put my thoughts out there for a discussion type material. I don't even think Drak will see this, but I wanted to put my thoughts out there. I wanted to make this video for that, because I enjoy the idea of talking about game design like this, and I enjoy the brainstorming essentially. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great